Welcome and thank you for joining this webinar about budget allocations and approval mechanisms in Anaplan. My name is Sebastian and I'm a consultant at Sonum International. Sonum is a consultancy company that specialized in budgeting, planning and forecasting, and we can help improve business processes starting from tool selection, model design, implementation and even training and support. Today's webinar will be about a real use case where budget needed to be allocated using more complex approval mechanisms. I'm going to start by giving you a brief overview of what I'll be covering today. First, some background information on Anaplan, after which I'll give a brief explanation on the business case, followed by a short demo of around 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll wrap up this webinar with some conclusions. The integrated planning possibilities that Anaplan offers are an ideal solution to avoid common problems caused by traditional solutions such as Excel. And these are probably already familiar to you, but I'll give some examples. First, versioning. Instead of several Excels, Anaplan works in a single real-time environment, avoiding having to consolidate multiple versions of Excel in the end. Second, workflow. The possibility to use complex approval mechanisms and workflows is something that traditional solutions rarely offer. Third, audit trail. We can track changes made with the automatic history log, meaning at any point you can see when and who changed the cell value. And finally, error sensitivity. Anaplan offers a solid foundation for models as it's fixed for end users, yet easily scalable for developers. And the list goes on. Now, coming back to my last point about development, this brings me to one of the strengths of Anaplan. It's a solution that can be maintained and even developed by the business. And Sonum's goal is to carry over ownership of the model to the people that are using it, which avoids becoming dependent on external resources, such as a consultancy company. Some other advantages of Anaplan, which I cover in this webinar, are the following. Integrated planning. We're going to do a global plan in a single model. The immediate visibility of the effects. Once we input something, we can immediately see the impact on the budget we've allocated. Insight in the data. We will be able to have a full picture of how we allocate budget versus how budget is received, invoiced, and even paid. And finally, some data validations. We're going to do some checks if all information is filled, and for example, also if there's even a budget available for requesting approvals. Also, I haven't mentioned it yet, but if there are any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat and I'll get back to you at the end of the webinar. Integrated or connected planning is what we see as one of the main benefits of Anaplan. Anaplan allows for a modular approach, meaning you can easily develop parts of the planning process into the solution. The choice for this approach could be, for example, because of limited resources within the company and still wanting to be able to start a business-changing process. This way of working also allows the business and the users to gradually become more familiar with the system, which gives them time to adjust and to get used to the enhanced process. Another important advantage is the reduced time needed for planning. Data input in the model is immediately available throughout the model, and this allows the user to have more time for analysis and less time in inputting data in several places. Thirdly, it helps to create a more accurate plan. Once the needed calculations are in place and the model structure is set, errors are hardly possible. Within an Anaplan workspace, several models can be developed and connected. Specific solutions can be developed within each business area, creating a collaborative and dynamic environment to support the entire planning process of your company. When involving more people in the planning process, a clear workflow is needed, structuring the business process in several steps. The demo I will give today includes a more complex approval mechanism. In this case, we run a budget that needs to be allocated top-down. However, this model would also work with a ZBB or bottom-up approach, if that would be preferred. The idea is the management sets up projects and the operational team further defines these in investment orders, which consist out of items. The goal is to allow the manager to approve an investment order without having to approve the items one by one. This approval process works with multiple steps, as there are approvers with various approval limits. If the limit of the first approver is exceeded, the investment order needs to be presented to a manager with the required budget limits. In the demo, these approvers are set up by limit and by geographical area. And this all includes an audit trail, allowing us to see who approved which PO at which moment. Lastly, I will show you how the PO tracking is done and how we visualize the complete picture in a straightforward report. Now let's start with the demo. Once we log into Anaplan, we start on our workspace, and in this case with a single model, but as mentioned before, there can be multiple models in one workspace. These models can, if beneficial, be directly connected with each other, and the big benefit of this is that anyone using a model always has the latest data at their disposal. If we open our model, we will start on our landing dashboard, and we can set up roles within Anaplan, allowing us to create different landing dashboards with useful information for the person in a specific function. Think, for example, about KPIs, pending approval, or a message indicating that a budget is being exceeded. And another useful feature is that it's possible to store instructions within Anaplan. This allows the user to be guided step by step through the process, in this case even with the possibility to include animated images. This replaces the old manuals being kept and maintained in Word, which are most of the time outdated. On the left hand side, we have an overview of all the dashboards in the model, and depending on my role, I will see a selection of these dashboards. This makes sure I only see what I need to see, and this avoids any confusion. Security settings will also allow us to set certain modules as read-only for one role and editable for others. Let's start with the role of a finance user. Finance, for example, would be responsible for inputting the global budget, inputting budget exchange rates, and to open and close years. They are not necessarily interested in the creation of items and investment orders. However, then again, a final report could be useful for them. As an administrator of the workspace, I can give myself a role. In this way, I can see what a user has access to. For example, when I switch myself to finance, we can see the selection on the dashboard changing. Here we see the landing dashboard for finance administrator. The main dashboard here is the one for input. So if I open it, you can see that here the budget years can be opened or closed, and the exchange rate can be input. We can decide to start a budget year from scratch, or we can start with the numbers from the previous budget. This will also give the managers a starting point for allocating their budget over their business units, or they can always select previous versions and check the data of the last year for themselves. Another important dashboard is the one for the approval matrix. Here the approvers and the respective approval limits can be set up. In this case, we can set up multiple approvers per business unit, and the region approver can be set up with, for example, an unlimited approval limit, so even the highest orders can be processed. As a side note, we can add users quickly. When assigned a role, they can also immediately log into Anaplan and start using the model. And so there's no need anymore to spend a lot of time on setting up users and their access profiles. In this example, the final task of the financial administrator is to input the global budget split by regions. Also here we can see there's a write access at the top table, but everything else is read access. Since everything is set up for the budget year, we can now switch to the role of a global manager, which is something that can only be done as a workspace administrator. Now when I switch my role, we can see that as a global manager, we can see the selection of dashboards change again. Now, for example, we see a different setup for the landing dashboards, and if we open the approval matrix, we're able to see all of the approvers, but we're not able to edit them. You can see that I've already set up some approvers by business unit or region and gave them an approval limit. When the finance administrator has opened the budget year and the input of the exchange rates and the initial numbers has been done, the budget allocation can be started. Now, as a global manager, I start planning for the current scenario. When planning in this case, we start with a previous year as a base. However, we can also start from scratch if we would like to. And we can use the report to see how the budget has been spent last year. We can take this into consideration when deciding on the budget allocation for the business units for the current year. Of course, the project and investment orders themselves will not be recreated. The copy will only be a base for the high-level budget allocations for the regions and the business units. We can make selections on the screen using the selectors at the top or the tables below. Also here we can limit the data that the user sees based on the security profile they have. As a global manager I can see all regions, but as a local manager, for example, I would only like to see maybe a single region. This is also possible to be set up in a few clicks. Now we can decide how we're going to allocate our budget. In this case we can either do it with a percentage, a local currency amount, or a US dollar amount. Now, for example, if I copy the US dollar amount to the local currency column, I will exceed the region's budget, as this is allocated in US dollars and the local currency is euros. The user will get a notification at the top of the dashboard giving an indication what exactly is wrong. And a bulletproof way to do this is to use percentages, because in this way you always be sure that the region amount is not surpassed. Also, a combination of these three options can be made, of course. It's all up to personal preference. I will now put on the hat of an operational user that is going to utilize the assigned budget. And in this case, they will create investment orders consisting of several items. For these investment orders, we're going to request an approval. Now, when I switch my profile and go to the landing dashboards again, we again see that there is a slightly different landing dashboard, customized on what the user needs to see. As mentioned before, we can also include KPIs or small reports based on what's interesting for this user. Now we would like to create an investment order consisting of several items. We can do this in the creation dashboard. Now let's select a project with some budget, and we can start by creating our first investment order. We can see at the end the verification message, and we can start assigning our properties, after which we can assign a budget as well. Now to this investment order we're going to add some items, after which we're going to send it for approval. So you can see we can either input in percentage or in local currency, and the same is going to be available for the item creation. Here at the top we see our investment order. We can see that everything is still in progress. It hasn't been approved yet, and if it was approved we could see how much of our investment order which has been approved is yet to be allocated. So once we create items, we give them a short name, we assign an item currency and a supplier and some other properties. And based on the item currency and the supplier combination, purchase orders are created. This means that if we use the same supplier but the item currency is different, we will have two purchase orders created. If they have the same item currency and the same supplier, they will be aggregated into a single purchase order. So here again we see the item currency, we see our business unit currency. We can either input in percentage or in the items currency. And in the end we have a verification message, so that if everything is complete we can move on to the request for approval dashboard. Here again we see an overview of our project, and if we scroll a bit lower we can see the investment orders, and you can see if they're ready for approval or not. If they're not, here at the end we again have a verification message telling us why they are not ready. We can move back to the investment order creation dashboard or the item creation dashboard to fix it and be able to send them for approval. If we're ready to request approval, we check the box and we click the button, after which we can inform our manager. If I log in as a manager with an approval limit, I can access the approval dashboard in which I can see all the investment orders that are ready for me to be approved. Here I can either approve them or I can reject them, and I can also input a comment. And if I reject them, then they will be going back to the request for approval dashboard, where the operational user can see, based on my comment, what is wrong with it, and they can either adjust it and request approval again, or they can delete the investment order completely. So if I approve the investment order, the purchase order or purchase orders are being generated, which will become available in the purchase order overview. As an operational user, these are the purchase orders I'm going to use to send to my supplier, after which I can start receiving the goods and services, which will in the end give us the complete picture from budget allocation to approved purchase order to receival of goods or services. And finally, if we would like, we can even integrate with the invoicing or payment system and bring that information back into Anaplan to get the complete picture from budget allocation to final payment. Now, if I switch again back to operational user role, I can see the purchase order is generated and I can inform my supplier. Now, this whole process includes an audit trail, which you can see in here, and I can see who approved the purchase order, at which time, and on which level, which limit they have. And finally, as I explained before, we have our report, where you can see the complete picture, budget allocated, the items and goods being received, and if we want the integration with the invoicing system / payment system. Next to this, we have options to close purchase orders and releasing budget back into the business unit or in the project. We can also, for example, work more closely with finance and create accrual reports, because we do have approved purchase orders and we do have item receivables. And lastly, based on assigned properties, we can set some KPIs. So for example, if we want to allocate a budget into a certain category, the operational users need to match these with items they create on the lowest level. And we can create reports which compare these and will be useful information to see how the budget has been allocated. I want to wrap up this webinar by giving some conclusion in the end. I hope you find it useful. So Anaplan is an easy to implement and very modular, which means it can be scaled up without problems and can be implemented in a step-by-step process. Budget allocation is fairly straightforward, and you can start from scratch, or you can use previous year's numbers as a starting point. Anaplan allows complex workflows to be implemented and customized, for example, with approval mechanisms based on your company's needs. We can have a complete audit trail. In this case, I showed you a small part of it, but we have a full cell-based audit trail, which you can see who changed a cell at what time and with what value. And we have the possibility to integrate with other systems to get the full picture into a single model, which allows to have a single source of truth. This was a short demo, and of course I couldn't go in depth into everything. However, if you would like to learn more about Anaplan or Sonum's experience in general, feel free to contact me or to have a look on our website. I would like to thank you for joining this webinar and your time, and I wish you a very nice day.